Welcome to American Players Theater Talkbacks to Go. I'm Buzz Kemper, and I invite you to take a walk up the hill with Orange Schroeder and me as Orange talks with actors James DeVita and James Ridge and director Tim Ocel about APT's 2019 production of The Book of Will by Lauren Gunderson.
We're here to talk about Lauren Gunderson's new play, The Book of Will, and I'm happy to have with me three guests today: director Tim Ocel, James Ridge, who's playing John Hemmings, and James DeVita, who's playing Henry Condell. This is a very exciting production for APT, in part because, as I said, it's a really recent play, and it's about one of our favorite playwrights, William Shakespeare. Lauren Gunderson is a playwright who is American. She was born in Atlanta in 1982, and she holds the distinction of being the most produced living playwright in America today. What do you think makes her work so popular?
Accessibility. I would say accessibility. And an extreme amount of heart plus some brain stuff going on. She writes about real people.
And these are real people, but of course not in current times. But I think she makes it accessible and contemporary so that we feel that they're living. Yeah,
it's interesting. The language in the play has a contemporary kind of structure to it. Occasionally the vocabulary goes Elizabethan on us, but mostly it's contemporary vocabulary and contemporary structure and contemporary comic structure. So there's that. It's also written it's also written kind of as a Shakespearean middle comedy. There's a lot of scenes. They bounce, they flow into each other like a middle comedy does. And there's also the darker edges, the crises that propels the comedy is, will the book with the folio get printed? There's a lot of obstacles to that.
And you mentioned the folio. I know that the play takes place after Shakespeare's death, and many of us, when we think about Shakespeare's works, assume that he wrote them down, published them, got royalties for them during his lifetime. But that wasn't really the case. What is the importance of the first folio, and what happens to it after what happens to his plays after he passes away?
There was no complete printing of Shakespeare's plays in his lifetime, and the only ones that were printed, and it was maybe half of them, I think 18 of them have quartos, which is the smaller book. A quarto is a piece of paper folded in fourths, so there's 8 pages to it. A folio is only folded once, so it's a larger version, like the Gutenberg Bible. So, and these were printed on the Gutenberg press, actually. But the quartos, whoever got to them and published them first had the right to print them. The King's Men had the right to perform them, but whoever got to them first, there were no copyrights.
Yeah, no copyright laws. Yeah. 100 years later, I think they started.
Yeah, they were not protecting playwrights at all during this time. Ben Jonson had produced his folio of his plays, but he paid for that. He had the money to do that. Shakespeare, no, none of them were truly printed by the King's Men during his lifetime.
So let's talk about the King's Men. I assume that John Hemmings and Henry Condell were members of that group?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Talk about Shakespeare's fellows.
Well, I know that the acting company, they all own shares in the company, and John Hemmings ended up being the manager, the money guy, the Excel spreadsheet guy. And he also owned shares in the Globe.
Started out as an actor, though, right, Jim?
He started out as a grocer. He was apprenticed as a grocer, and the woman he married had been previously married to an actor when she was 14,
something like
16,
that.
15. Yes. Married to this fellow for 2 years, was killed by a fellow actor. And then John married her at 17. And we are surmising, at least in our world in the play, that that's how he was introduced to the world of players and the theater. And yeah, he lived longer than most of the other original King's Men. John did,
yes,
to the ripe old age of 62.
Yes.
Which is very old for back then.
Which is very old. Yeah.
And what about Henry?
Well, Henry was an actor in the company and good friends with John. And from the best that we can tell, I think he was not a lead actor all the time. That some of the mentions in the play, but he had some good roles like Mercutio and would understudy go on for. In this play, he goes on for Falstaff in Henry IV.
Yes.
For him, so I think of him as a secondary player. Is kind of how I think of him. Talented, but not a lead.
Yeah, it seems that Burbage, who is in the first scene of The Book of Will, is the star lead actor of the company when the play opens. And Henry's playing secondary roles, and John is totally in the office now, not on stage at all. It's interesting, in the folio prints a list of the King's Men who perform the play. So all of the names that we're familiar with are on there, and Shakespeare's the first one in the list, although they're not sure whether that was for formality or because he was a lead actor. They're not really sure about that. And then Burbage is next, and then John Hemmings. And then there's a bunch of names, and then it's Henry. So that's interesting to me.
We talk in the play what a good actor John was.
John was, yeah, really, really good actor. And it seems like when he was younger, he was doing all of these lead roles, and in a way, probably before Burbage was doing them, at least the early stuff.
Yeah, they also talk about in the play that he had a stutter.
Yes.
And I don't know, I like to think that started happening as he got older. Like Olivier talks about, the older he got, the more stage fright he was susceptible to, and I like to think that his stutter started later in his career. Is like, oh, somebody's going to find me out. I'm not really very good at this.
I'm really a grosser at heart.
Right.
In the management too, just to. We know a lot of older actors now that are leaving the business because they want to get something a little more secure, something that has money coming in.
That's right.
So it happens sometimes. You get a little older. It's like,
if you've seen Shakespeare in Love, Henry and John are both in that. Those characters are in that movie, and the guy who stammers and does the beginning of the Romeo and Juliet sequence that's John Hemmings. So you've probably encountered these guys before in other films, possibly.
Is the stammer going to be part of your characterization?
Yeah, there are a couple of places where Lauren wrote it in.
It's written in. Yeah, and it gets tense in the first. There's a lot of contemporary issues in the play. I mean, the idea of bullying, the stammering and the bullying that happens in the first scene. The idea of being accosted is in the play. It's done gently, but that's there. The idea of women becoming empowered through their own energies. There's an interesting scene for the three women when they discover the poems that have been published by Lady Lanier, and they're shocked that she actually got published. Now, maybe she's paying for it herself, whatever, but still the fact that she's using her own name on these poems and they find them, that actually, it's kind of like, oh my God, a woman voted kind of thing. I mean, it's just kind of unheard of.
And who are the women characters?
It's Rebecca, who is John's wife, Elizabeth, who is Henry's wife, and Alice, who is John and Becky's daughter, are the main three women in the play. And then Lady Lanier has one scene. At one point in the play, they go to her for money because she's married wealthy. But supposedly she was Shakespeare's mistress, and she's the dark lady in the sonnets. What I find interesting, if you've seen the movie All Is True, you find out that the dark lady is actually Ian McKellen. you know, that it's actually a man, but it was made a woman for the sonnet. So anyway, it's all very interesting.
So clearly we have a fascination with Shakespeare today and who he really was and what happened to his plays. What would have happened if the first folio had not been published?
We would have lost probably half of the plays. We would have lost As You Like It, Antony and Cleopatra, I think the Scottish play. Half of the plays had never been printed in quarto. And when the play starts, the fire has already happened at the Globe, and a lot of the plays have been lost. And they haven't performed all the plays in the canon for a while. It's not like they're performing all 36 or so plays. They're also performing Ben Jonson plays. They're performing things by Fletcher. They're performing other things, not just Shakespeare.
And what came down to it probably would have been much more corrupted than we have.
Absolutely. Yes.
Whatever did survive was extremely corrupted.
Yes.
It was stolen and copied by boys in the theater, and
yes.
So there's no oversight on the scripts that did come.
No, and there are several plays that have more than one quarto, and each quarto is different. Like the King Lear quartos are very different from each other.
Bad.
Really bad. Really bad.
Yeah.
And the play does start out with a really bad Hamlet performance from a bad quarto.
Just to bring home the fact that as theater lovers at APT, we owe a great debt of thanks to these fellows of Shakespeare's who helped rescue all this work, and also to Lauren Gunderson for telling the story.
Yes.
And to those of you who bring it to the stage, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
American Players Theater Talkbacks to Go is a co-production of Orange Tree Imports and Audio for the Arts. Please find us on iTunes and YouTube under APT Talkbacks to Go. Our theme song is called Play in the Woods and is written and performed by myself, Ben Ferris, Tyler Willenbrink, Noah Gilfillan, Elliot Gilfillan, Grant Blaschka, and Susan Hofer. With Orange Schroeder, I'm Buzz Kemper. Thank you for listening. A co-production of Orange Tree Imports and Audio for the Arts.